Good afternoon. So I am here from Lawrence to discuss the outreach that we do at the Watkins Museum and how that can possibly translate to archives and museums all across the state. I picked this title, To Share and Be Shared, because that's really what we keep in mind whenever we are hosting a program. We have a collection full of great great artifacts and an archives that's full of a lot of very interesting pieces. And so the more that we can share them, the more that people who are aware of them will share them with their friends. So again, I'm from the Watkins Museum of History. We are the Historical Society for Douglas County, which covers Lawrence, but also Baldwin and Eudora and other townships in the area. To start off with, why do we bother with outreach programs? I mean, we've got a great collection and we know how to use it, and it's important for longevity to have these records available. But without outreach programs, the community isn't going to know that you're there. Usage will drop. With a drop of usage, you'll find it's harder and harder to get funding. You can't offer as much in the way of open hours or programming. Everybody loses. So you want to keep expanding your audience, keep trying to expand your audience. The picture down here is a picture of our very empty gallery. It's empty right now because we're doing some renovations, but way in the back you can barely see a intrepid archives volunteer that we have at the Watkins. But that's not what we want. We want people in and using our resources. When we plan new programs for outreach, there's 3 steps that I found that we typically follow. First is to highlight the must-sees of your collection. Everyone has stars in their collection, really cool pieces that you know you want to highlight. So think about those first. Develop partnerships. It's easier to work with other organizations than all alone, all by yourself. And third, publicize your events using an online presence. It can be very inexpensive to have an online presence. It can be almost free to have an online presence. And so if you can, get online. If you have the means, put a website together and people will use it for learning about your archives before they come in or even while they're there. I'll start off with the must-sees in your collection. What in the archives is especially interesting or different, funny, that really shows the community spirit? Any of these pieces that you find to be especially interesting, anything that you're passionate about, is worth focusing on, and it's worth highlighting. You know, people like to look at all of the stuff on the walls at Applebee's. You know how they do like all of these collections on their walls about the local history? People love to see that. And they go there and they really enjoy seeing, you know, this old sports memorabilia on the walls. Well, all of those things are interesting and they speak to people's sense of memory. They speak to their sense of community spirit. They like to see them. So if you've got pieces in your archives that share an interesting story about an individual in the community, or that highlight the architecture, talk about the history of the architecture in the community, those are the kinds of things that you want to remember, and you can build programs around those items. In the Watkins, some of the highlights of our collection are as elaborate as the files. We've got several file cabinets full of site files, so individual addresses in the old neighborhoods of Lawrence. That is a really cool piece of our collection. We also have files on families, influential families, which there were a lot of them, I mean, ranging from James Naismith to the woman who was influential in getting the Humane Society founded. We have files on each of these families, and people in Lawrence and in Douglas County can come look up these families and learn a little bit about them. So try to find what in your collection you really want to highlight, and from those you can build programs off of that. Partnerships. We rarely do things all by ourselves. by ourselves. I mean, the Watkins does a lot of programs, but it's unusual for us to do it completely on our own. We generally have a partner in some way. It may be in name only. They may be heavily involved in the planning and in the actual event that we do, but no matter what their degree of participation, it's always worthwhile to have a partner. It's a great way to expand the audience and improve your visibility, because all of a sudden you don't have one audience, you have two audiences. You can work with other not-for-profits, but also local businesses. Local businesses are often very willing and really excited to work with you on activities or programs that are about the community. I'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. And working with other people really multiplies your resources. You're not just getting another audience from this other organization, but you're getting all of their staff. You're getting all of their marketing. You're getting all of their social media. I mean, if they can help you in any way at all, it's worthwhile. It's worth pairing up, teaming up with somebody, and you get their brain power as well. They may have a great idea for an addition to a program that you haven't thought of. So partners are always great. Below, I've just pictured some of the organizations in and around Lawrence that we've been working with. You know, some that are pretty expected: the Lawrence Public Library, the Preservation Alliance, which focuses on the built environment in Lawrence. Kansas Public Radio has been a great partner of ours, and even the Kansas Humanities Council, but also the Eldridge Hotel. The Eldridge Hotel is a very historic building, but it's also a business. You know, it's an active hotel. People are coming in there for conferences and weddings all the time, but they love to tap into their historic. They like to remind people that this was a historic place. This place has been burned down. They were burned down in Quantrill's raid. So they like connecting with the Watkins to really emphasize their history and their part in Lawrence's history. Some of the success with partnerships. Yeah. Oh, yes. How did we make our connections with partners? It's a fair question. I really tried to get out there and contact individuals who had something in common with an activity that I wanted to do. With the Eldridge Hotel, I wanted to have some sort of event that was fun and lighthearted. I was imagining some sort of speakeasy style party that would bring in a new type of audience. And I knew that the Eldridge Hotel had a lot of space to work with. And so I contacted the woman there who ran programming and ran like the special events. She doesn't work in that capacity anymore. But I called her and said, hey, do you want to work together on this? With other groups, let's see. The Lawrence Public Library, that was actually a connection that was made for me. They have a pretty large program staff over there, so I was introduced to somebody there. It's really most of the time about picking up the phone and coming to somebody else with an idea, saying, I've got this great idea for a program. I think this is how you could participate, and leave it to them to say yes or no. But if you approach them with a concrete idea, then they're more likely to say, well, there's not a lot of work that I have to do to participate in this. My name gets out there just as much. So yeah, sure, I can support you. I'll talk about some of those in a couple minutes when I go through some of the more specific events. Other nonprofit groups, like I said, some of these are pretty expected. Other museums and archives in your area, the public library, but also arts organizations. Lawrence is lucky to have an art center that's downtown, and they have a wonderful staff that have been really willing to work with us and really eager to work with us on special programs. The school districts, it's sometimes hard to break into the school districts, to actually break into the classrooms, but once they are, the teachers there are just so excited to work with public historians. They like having access to primary documents. And if you have a program that helps to support whatever it is that they're teaching, if they're teaching about local history, if they're teaching about architecture, if they're teaching about a person in their community, they love to have any sort of primary source documents that can bring an extra element into their lessons. I'm working with the Parks and Rec division of the county right now on some activities. Neighborhood associations, we've got a couple that are very strong, that have a really strong community, and we like to work with them whenever we can. Also special interest groups like the Preservation Alliance. If you have a genealogy society that meets in your community, they often know the collection better than some of the other employees. We have a genealogy society that meets at the Watkins Museum. They know that collection way better than I do. They know all of the archives. So sometimes they are really excited to get involved in another outreach activity. So a couple of successful programs. Yes? Oh, Nerd Night. I'm sorry, did I ignore it? So Nerd Night is it's an event in Lawrence. It happens monthly. I saw that Salina is about to start a bi-monthly Nerd Night. Nerd Night is how do you describe it? It's a evening of lighthearted yet very informative lectures, usually about 20 minutes in length. There's usually 2 or 3 per evening, and each of these lectures is presented by a so-called expert in whatever topic it is that they're researching. So they give a 20-minute PowerPoint about whatever topic. I gave a talk about East Lawrence several months ago, but I've also seen topics on rock music in the Soviet Union in the 80s. I've seen topics about how to make meth, and it was delivered by a science professor or by a chemistry professor, so he knew exactly how to do it, and kind of worked in some of the pop culture of if you've seen the TV show Breaking Bad, he kind of tied in popular culture with how to do this. So Nerd Night is a really great resource for getting interested people, people who are interested in learning in a low stress environment. It's not a scholarly environment, but people who are very interested in learning with a beer in one hand. So I'll talk about it more in a few minutes. Some of the successful programs that we've done that deal specifically with our archives, 2 of them that we've done in the last year. One was called Who Lived in My House? The second is the East Lawrence Bike Tour. Who Lived in My House was it was a summer program that was offered through the Lawrence Public Library, but it was a Watkins program. We did all of the prep work, we ran it, and it happened at the Watkins, but because the library puts out this annual, summer reading event that's, 8 pages long. They've got a whole schedule of activities going on throughout the summer all over town. We were part of it, and so we benefited from their marketing. So that partnership alone was worth all of the effort, because not only did it get kids into the museum and into the archives and using the archives, but it got their parents notified as well. What we did is, it was called Who Lived in My House because kids who, whether or not they live in an older neighborhood of Lawrence or they live in one of the newer neighborhoods, they could come in, learn about the site files that we have in the archives, learn how to use them, and they were given a few addresses that we had prepared for them, a few addresses to look up the history of that house. They used our city directories and our site files and our family files to learn how to use these resources on their own. So Like I was saying, we've got some interesting people who have lived in Lawrence. These kids were just given addresses, and by looking up the address in these city directories and the site and family files, they learned that these, blank addresses, XX house on Massachusetts Street, that's where James Naismith lived. And at this other house on New York Street, that's where the woman who founded the Humane Society lived. So these kids came in, the program was about an hour and a half long. They learned how to use all of these resources, and this was just a fun summer activity. So if they could look up their own house's address, if any of these kids lived in the older neighborhoods in Lawrence, they were able to look up their house and the history of their house, who lived in their house before they did. Some of these houses are 120, 130 years old, and so they had a pretty fascinating history behind them. The kids loved knowing who slept in their bedroom 50 years ago. Sometimes it was the same family for over 100 years. So it was always kind of a surprise, like who are we going to find this time? Is it going to be somebody really exciting? There was always that element of surprise built in. So we offered that several times last summer, and we're doing it again this year, except we had so many adults, parents, and just interested adults asking about it that I think this year we're going to offer it specifically as an adult program instead of a kids program. Kids will still be welcome, but it really brought a lot of people in to use the archives for something as simple as looking in our city directories and some of the site files. A program that we did last fall, the East Lawrence Bike Tour, which is when I talked at Nerd Night, was a program that happened outside the museum walls. We met at the museum and then took off on a bike ride that was about a total of about 3 to 4 miles. It was not an extensive bike ride, but we used the archives to do research on a number of historic houses in East Lawrence. East Lawrence is a neighborhood directly adjacent to the museum, and so everything was very close, but it's also a working class neighborhood. It often gets ignored in favor of the more glamorous Old West Lawrence. If you've been to Lawrence and seen those gorgeous houses in that neighborhood, big stately homes on large plots. East Lawrence isn't anything like that. It's a working class neighborhood, smaller houses, simpler architecture, but yet there are a lot of fascinating stories, especially about populations, immigrant populations, German populations living in East Lawrence. The Black community had a really solid home in East Lawrence. We were able to use archival material, site files, photographs about this section of town to really get people involved. Even though it was outside the walls of the museum, we went into East Lawrence, rode around, and had a great time. We got lucky. It was a really beautiful day last October. But it was at that night that the week before, I presented a talk about Nerd Night. And if any of you hear about a Nerd Night happening nearby, I highly recommend you go. They're a lot of fun. It's very lighthearted, and it's a good way to learn something new about a topic that you'd never encountered before, like 80s rock bands in the Soviet Union. We've had several programs that are not based specifically on archives, but have archive elements to them. That poster there, Safeguard the Babies, which I love because it's got this really sad-looking baby, is persuading parents to not consume alcoholic beverages. Parents drinking will weaken your child's vitality. So this poster we used as part of our Prohibition-era party, our Speakeasy Party that we had at the Eldridge House. Basketball exhibit opening. If you know Lawrence, it's crazy about basketball. We opened a new exhibit that was about basketball, not just KU basketball, but about the history of basketball in the county, at the high schools, at Haskell, the women's teams in Eudora especially. This exhibit really dug deep into our photo collection. There's a lot of great team photos. We knew that we had all of these team photos, and so an exhibit was really almost built around them. And these are photos from over 100 years ago. with the basketball in the center of the team photo with the year painted on it. And you can still appreciate kids coming to this exhibit and seeing these team photos going, oh, my team photo looks just like that. I play on a basketball team. We do the same exact thing. At that opening event, we had a special event for some of our members. We actually played peach basket basketball. And we got a couple of, you can kind of see it in that right-hand photo. We got a couple of baskets. They weren't technically peach baskets, but you did have to throw the ball into the basket. And because the baskets were closed on the bottom, as they were when Naismith first invented the game, you had to climb a ladder and get the basketball out of the basket. So it was a really immersive experience and still a lot of fun. Fun is something that we really try to highlight. We want it to be lighthearted, and we want people to learn, but the easiest way to learn is to have fun at the same time. The Speakeasy Party that I've talked about a few times was at the Eldridge. I knew we wanted to do something at the Eldridge with the Eldridge. So we had this 20s inspired party. It turned out to be a fundraiser for the museum. We had it in this really cool little room that the Eldridge has that, if you've been there, it's the Big Six room. It's downstairs, and it's this kind of dark little bar down there, but it's got all of these Big Six era college pennants all around it. And it's the atmosphere is very cool. But we opened it up to the public, charged a fee for attendance. The Eldridge put together some drink specials for us, and we really encouraged people to dress up as if they were, visiting a speakeasy. We had a secret password that you had to give at the door, and a lot of our attendants really got into it. I mean, the girls that are in that picture on the left had never attended a Watkins event before. They were completely new visitors. But in order to keep it a museum event, because we were running it, but it was not at the museum, we brought in a couple of those posters, that baby poster that I showed you a few slides ago, but also this really beautiful Prohibition era poster, observance and enforcement, not repeal. So we were able to pull in these archival elements and still have a good time. And people really loved looking at these posters, not only because they're beautiful, but because they could laugh at that baby poster and really appreciate the artwork on this one. If any of you were watching TV 30 years ago, you probably were aware of the movie The Day After, which is it was a made-for-TV movie about what would happen in the days following a nuclear attack. Well, that movie, parts of it were filmed in Lawrence and in and around Lawrence on the KU campus, and they extensively used locals as extras in the movie. So people in Lawrence have strong memories associated with the filming of this movie. A lot of them played burn victims. As you can see, that guy's getting his makeup done. Burn victims, or they were on the basketball court in Allen Fieldhouse playing, people with radiation sickness. So there are a lot of strong memories associated with the filming of this movie, and we wanted to collect some of those memories. So we worked with Kansas Public Radio to conduct oral histories about the filming of that movie. We did this at the opening of a special exhibit on the movie, and so not only were we able to share archival pieces like scripts and ticket stubs from the showing of the movie posters, photographs. That's Jason Robards in the bottom right-hand corner from when he was in Lawrence filming the movie. But we also collected all of these great oral histories. And because we worked with Kansas Public Radio to do them, Kay McIntyre, who is one of the people you hear on the radio, she's on, I think, every Sunday, she worked with us to record these interviews, and she's holding on to them for right now, but in the future we want to do something together and create some sort of program using these oral histories. We had a great time, and it meant that Kay did a special feature on her weekly program about the exhibit and about the experience of collecting these oral histories. So that was a really, really fantastic partnership. We had a program in November celebrating Veterans Day, we used a speaker from the Kansas Humanities Council Speakers Bureau. His name's Matthew Thompson, and he does a talk on POW camps around Kansas. He gives a great talk, so if you're looking for somebody to talk about POW camps, go to the KHC website, find him, and get him to come out to your place, because he gives a really interesting talk. We pulled out some archival pieces, some photographs from a POW camp in Lawrence, and Matthew got to kind of reference them in his talk. If you have a website, it's everyone's first stop. Anyone who is online, who is using the internet to do any sort of research, they will likely visit your website before, possibly even before they visit your actual site. So before they walk through the door, you want to give them a good impression. It's best to keep websites simple and easy, and keep that basic information easy to find. Put it on the front page. And especially if you can't update it frequently, which is often the case with technology, it's harder to update websites than it is other forms of online presences. Make sure just the essentials are online so it doesn't get outdated very quickly. If you have constantly changing elements to your schedule, keep what's online pretty basic. If it's hard for you to update things, keep it pretty basic online. Social media is another great way to reach people. If you don't have a Facebook page or a Twitter account, I recommend getting those put together. They're free, and they are a really easy way to share all sorts of information. We share events on it, but also every Wednesday I've put a photo from our collection on our Facebook page and explain what's in the photo, who's pictured in the photo, where in Douglas County this photo was taken, what year it was taken, just the basic information. And we get dozens of people liking it or giving it a thumbs up, basically saying, I think this photo is pretty cool. We get lots of people every week on our Facebook page saying, I'm aware of you, I think what you're doing is cool, I like this picture. And it just leaves a positive impact in their mind about your institution. It's very easy to keep it maintained. Keep it light. People aren't coming to a Facebook page for really in-depth research. They want, the very basics. They want to see something fun. They want to see something that's easy to digest. Keep it visual. It's a perfect way to share photographs, like I was saying. Keep it updated. It's because it's so easy and so quick to update Facebook pages, it's often easier to update your events here than it is on your website, because you can do this from anywhere. You don't have to be at your institution. You can do it from anywhere. You can even do it on your phone if you have a smartphone. And not only can you share all that information, but it's excellent for communication. People can ask you questions through your Facebook site publicly, and you can respond to it publicly so that anybody else who might have that question will get on the Facebook page and see it and say, oh, it's already been answered for me. It's very easy to use. I talked a little bit already about working with schools, and these are just a few of the points that I follow when I am preparing new programs with schools. I won't go through them individually, but because each school district and each classroom is so different, it's good to have a place to start. And most of all, it's important to have fun when you're doing outreach. If you're not having fun, then chances are they aren't either. So that's what I've got for you today. Does anyone have any questions or want to share your own experiences about outreach, successful programs, or programs that you've worked with other groups on? Yeah, they were. Our curator / archivist, she wears two hats. She mounted them, well first she encapsulated them and then mounted them to foam core so that they were protected and easily transportable, but we also put them in sections of the room that were kind of set back a little bit so that they were still, you could still see them, but they weren't necessarily interrupting, Yes, getting beer spilled on them, exactly. Yeah. We invite people to become members. I'll say that in the last year, I've been at the Watkins for a little under 2 years, and we've really been focusing on audience growth in that point. We have several new staff members, so it's a pretty new staff to the museum and to the archives. But our attendance, which a few years ago was about between 5,000 and 6,000 per year. This year we were over, I think we had 1,150. So we have really increased attendance to the museum, which in turn has improved or has added to the number of members. We always make membership available, but it's not required for participation of most of the events. But yes, we have grown our membership in the last couple of years. Yeah. Oh, I realized that I didn't say I was going to talk about partnerships and about working with businesses. A lot of times you will be surprised with the people who are running these businesses and how passionate they might be about a certain subject. So to wrap up, I'll tell you about our most recent event, which was our beer night. We invited people to the museum to hear a Humanities Council speaker talk about the history of brewers and breweries in Kansas. And then we went upstairs for a beer tasting using some of our local breweries. They gave us donations of beer, a couple of kegs of beer. I didn't realize this, but one of the managers of one of our local breweries, 23rd Street Brewery, when I went in to talk to him about participating in this beer night, he said, "Oh, I'd love to. I was a history major." So not only was he really excited about this event, for his business, but he thought it was really cool too. He's interested in history, and so it's those kinds of connections that you don't even know exist. You don't know what people are interested in, and so it can always be a surprise. I had no idea that the manager of the brewery was a history major, but he has ever since then been a very vocal supporter of the museum and of our events, and he gave us a lot of free beer. So it's always helpful. Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, I'm going to stick around.